Hello and welcome to Chapter 10, When the Employees Are Professionals. So again, as in previous chapters, we're going to hit the highlights. This chapter starts on page 175 with our objectives and key terms. One of our key terms is going to be profession, and that's where we're going to start. We're going to move over to page 177. All right, so the American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language defines a profession as an occupation or vocation requiring training in the liberal arts or the sciences and advanced study in a specialized field. So, therefore, a professional should be one who has assured competence in a particular field or occupation by virtue of the training and study noted in the foregoing definition. So, within healthcare, some of the occupations you think of as professions is going to be your physicians and your nurses. And our text says that some other certain occupations, like LPN, people don't necessarily think of those as a profession. All right, so we're going to continue on in that next column. Under the Fair Labor Standards Act, an employee in a specific position must, and this is to be considered a professional, number one, have primary duties that require advanced knowledge, application of imagination or creativity, or the exercise of talent, or employment in a teaching capacity by a legally recognized educational institution. And then going down to number two, they have to do work that requires the exercise of discretion and judgment. Number three, perform work that is describable as primarily intellectual and varied. Number four, spend no more than 20% of the time doing work that is not part of, directly related to, or performed in a support of requirements 1, 2, and 3. And number five, be paid not less than a specifically stated amount per week. So that's the FLSA definition, I guess you could say, of a professional. All right, so in healthcare, we talked about some of our medical professionals already: physicians, nurses, physical therapists. I would think we could put pharmacists in that category as well. Those are all various medical professionals. But then you also have non-medical professionals. Moving over to page 178. So who are some of those? Well, you've got accountants. They may be CPAs. There may be graduate engineers, and they have professional engineering licenses. You also can have attorneys, and so that's a profession in and of itself. And various state and municipal regulations call for boiler plants to be operated by licensed stationary engineers, and government agencies require that some forms of electrical and plumbing work be performed by only licensed electricians and licensed plumbers. So that's a profession as well that's non-medical in the healthcare systems. So we're going to drop down it's not necessarily in a PowerPoint slide, but the essential team approach. We're going to discuss that just a little bit. That's on 178. Emphasis on the team approach is of special concern to the supervisors whose group includes professional employees. The presence of professionals and non-professionals in the same group suggests that one supervisor may encounter vast differences in education, training, and background within a limited area of responsibility. There are likely to be many differences between and among professionals and non-professionals in terms of interest and attitudes and their responses to supervision. It falls to the supervisor to ensure that the contributions of all of these perhaps diverse individuals are pooled and effectively focused towards the care of the organization's patients. So I know in the hospital at Tupelo, where I came from, I did have certain work groups where, I had, HIT professionals in a work group with people that had no college education. They were high school graduates that, learned the job. And so, expectations are different from professionals and non-professionals. But at the same time, their job was the same. And so you kind of had to pool, like it says, and just focus toward us all getting to the same place, regardless of education, regardless of training. All right, so moving over to professional treatment and professional behavior, we're over on 179. The terms professional behavior and professional treatment represent concepts that should be fairly readily understood. However, although readily understood, they are not nearly as readily defined. Attempts at definition usually result in a person recognizing the necessity to consider simultaneously both concepts and their relationships to each other. One ordinarily discovers that professional behavior and professional treatment are relative concepts that exist in a chicken or egg relationship. Does professional behavior command professional treatment, or does treatment as a professional inspire professional behavior? In a practical sense, the two concepts are inseparable. Professional behavior and professional treatment are opposite sides of the same coin. In many people's minds, a given level of professional behavior is associated with professional status, and the organization holds expectations of the employee regarding this level of behavior. So going down to that section labeled a two-way street, one may argue convincingly but incompletely for either side of the conflict. Much as individuals' treatment as a professional is indeed earned through appropriate behavior, at least continued treatment as a professional is sustained, perhaps rather than earned through professional behavior. Thorough professional treatment and conscientious professional behavior should ideally exist in full from the beginning of a working relationship. Each should support and sustain the other as the relationship progresses. In brief, behavior and treatment constitute the opposing lines of an active two-way street in which the traffic constantly flows in both directions. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about control of the work for the professional. The work of the professional is often controlled by the person and not the clock or by any particular system. Unlike most non-professionals, the professional often has a large measure of control over what is to be done and when it is to be done. The professional's control is much like the manager's control, governed by the individual and rarely, if ever, by the clock. The professional work does not always require 8 hours effort beginning and ending at some specific time. Think about your physician. They may have office hours in the morning, then they may go take a long leisurely lunch, and then they may run by the hospital for a few hours to do rounding. So they're not really controlled by a clock. Sometimes longer hours are required, and we can use our hospitalist example for that. Hospitalists typically work 12-hour shifts, but if you have 35 patients to round on and it takes you 25-30 minutes a patient, then you may work well over your 12 hours that day. So sometimes the longer hours are required and sometimes less time is necessary. But the professional is employed to produce certain results, and in doing so usually has more flexibility concerning the manner in which those results are achieved. The professional is expected to be something of a self-managed worker in a number of aspects. Thus, the emphasis in the definition of professional on the exercise of discretion and judgment. I can tell you that when I became a salaried employee at North Mississippi Medical Center, I was told that I may not necessarily have to work 8 hours in a day. There may be some days that I needed to be there 10 hours. But then on the flip side of that, I could leave at lunch one day if my work was done. So again, it's not something that's truly monitored by a clock. It's more along the lines of, is the job done? Have I used my best judgment, and is everything complete that I need to complete? Or, do I need to stay late on a Friday evening, or can I take off at lunch and go enjoy the afternoon? So, initiative, a key concern. One major area in which professional behavior or lack thereof is frequently evident is in the exercise of individual initiative. Ideally, all employees at all levels should be encouraged to exercise initiative in certain manners, especially in calling problems or inconsistencies to management's attention. However, true professional behavior suggests that the professional, far more so than the non-professional, does not wait to be prodded into action, but rather takes positive steps either to deal with problems directly or to call them to the proper person's attention. So they're not sitting around waiting for somebody else to go report a problem or talk about something to the manager, they're more likely to go and, make those positive steps themselves. They're not sitting on their hands. Now, as far as dedication, true professional behavior need not be interpreted as requiring one to become a dedicated workaholic. Many of those who work long hours and extra days may be doing so because they enjoy what they do. However, except for the occasional push that might be required during an emergency situation or an important major undertaking, the employee need not prove professionalism by constantly working extra hours and extra days. The true workaholic, found primarily among the ranks of managers and professionals, is experiencing some potentially serious problems and is perhaps using the job to compensate for these difficulties. So, being a workaholic is not cool. You're going to burn yourself out. Now, if you just absolutely love your job and love what you're doing, sure, I understand. I love my job here at ICC, and, I'm contracted for 30 hours a week, but there's times that I see myself on my laptop at home, setting up exams, setting up quizzes, and, it's fun. I enjoy doing it. So, in other cases, either, at the hospital in the past, there's been weeks that I've worked 45, 50 hours because of major system issues going on, or I was implementing a new system. So, you've got to find that balance, that work-life balance. And that's always hard to achieve, especially when you are in a professional position. You feel like, I'm here, I've got to do my best, I need to put in these long hours, I need to show them that I'm a good worker and they can trust me and depend on me, but you're going to burn yourself out at the same time. So watch that work-life balance. All right, so the double standard. So let's talk about double standard here for a second. The way in which an organization is most likely to err in its treatment of the professional employee is in the perpetuation of a perceived double standard. In other words, the organization may treat the individual as a professional at times and in a contrary fashion at other times. Children detect the double standard the instant they are exposed to it, and so do most employees, professional or otherwise. And unfortunately, some organizations seem to treat people as professionals only when doing so is convenient for the organization. The inconsistent treatment says to the employee, in effect, we are really depending on you to do the right thing at the right time and do it in a professional manner. But you had better hit the clock by 8:30 at the latest to make certain that lunch is only 30 minutes long, or you'll be hearing about it. So it's kind of a double standard there. All right, so equivalent treatment. Moving over on bottom section on 181. In regard to the policies of the organization, it's appropriate to reward certain classifications of employees with more of some particular benefits. For instance, many organizations grant more vacation time to managers and professional and technical employees than to rank-and-file employees. In employee relations matters, however, the professional must be treated exactly the same as the non-professional. For instance, it is decidedly unfair, not to mention illegal, to apply a different set of work rules and perhaps a more lenient disciplinary process to a group of employees who are different from others only in that they are professionals. It is true that professionals ordinarily receive a higher salary, and because many employees' benefits are tied to pay level, the professional is more generously rewarded. This is fine as long as the benefit structure, once established as policy, is consistently applied. All right, moving on to slide number 10, and we're moving over to page 183, Motivation and the Professional. The department supervisor can have an influence on true motivating factors, that is, factors inherent in the work itself, and environmental factors, those circumstances that can sometimes foster dissatisfaction. However, the extent of possible influence depends partly on the job, specifically what the supervisor has to work with, and partly on the organization, particularly how much latitude the supervisors allow. Moving over on to the last paragraph in that section. For the most part, the professional employee is a mover and a doer by inclination and more of a leader than a follower. The supervisor must recognize this and attempt to utilize these characteristics in working with both the person and the job to inspire self-motivation in the employee. All right, so flipping over, managing to motivate. So we're going to talk about some of the things that keeps them satisfied, and then we're going to move to the next page to talk about these dissatisfiers. So in early years of a career, the serious professional who becomes dedicated to the work of the profession, they spend more attention to satisfying the need to. They want to do interesting and meaningful work. If you're just doing something to do it, draw a paycheck, you're not ever going to be satisfied with that. So looking for interesting, meaningful work. Experiencing a feeling of accomplishment. If you go home at the end of every day and you had a great day at work, you got a lot done, you got a lot accomplished, you're going to feel good about yourself and you're going to feel good about the job. Be challenged. Going in and doing a job where there's absolutely no challenge, fosters no thought process, that can be, a dissatisfier too. Grow within the profession. Within the HIM world, there are local organizations such as Northeast Council, and then you've got Mishima where you can be an officer, and even on a national level, being a part of the AHIMA and possibly becoming an officer there. You've always got growth within the profession, not just for job wise, but for networking purposes. You've got growth there. Achieve a measure of status and be recognized for making a positive contribution. So these professionals, they're going to be more satisfied with these things. Much responsibility for employee motivation rests with the supervisor of the professional employee. The supervisor must be continually aware of those all-important needs that bring the professional employee to work day after day. Dropping down, compared with other employees, professionals are sometimes harder to find, are more difficult to recruit, may take longer to bring into the organization, may sometimes take longer to develop into independently functioning workers, and usually require considerably more time, effort, and expense to replace when they leave. All right, so let's go over to the dissatisfiers. Generally acknowledged that the reasons why valued employees quit their jobs is because they're not satisfied. There's no job satisfaction. There's a lack of challenge. It's too easy. I'm bored. I just can't put up with this anymore. And then there's dissatisfaction with supervision. Maybe they don't like their manager. Maybe they have no respect for their manager. Or there's incompatibility within the work group. Some people just can't get along with others. Doesn't matter, where they go work, you're just not going to be compatible with everyone. And sometimes you've just got to find a way around that. Or the pay is just not there. Sometimes a job could be easy. It could be, relatively satisfying. But if the pay is not there, you're not going to be satisfied and you will quit. All right, so there can be management credibility problems when, so moving over to 185, when there are professional employees in a work group, there's always the potential for questions about the manager's credibility within those employees. There's always the potential for differences of professional opinion, and there's always the likelihood of varying degrees of willingness of the professional employee to accept direction from the manager. Management credibility problems may exist when the manager is not of the same professional as the employee. For example, an employed physician may question the credibility of an administrative superior who is a professional administrator or perhaps stepped into administration from dentistry. So you've got issues with managers that could be non-professionals, and then managers that come from another field, and then credibility problems are also likely to arise when the manager is perceived as limited to a lower professional level than the employee. So a clinical psychologist with a doctoral degree may be less than completely willing to accept the leadership of a manager whose education stopped at the master's degree level. So if I have a doctorate and my supervisor only has a master's, there may be some credibility issues there. I will use a personal example. I have an RHIA, and two of our past directors hired since our director left in August of 2015, and two of the directors that came in to the role were RHITs. And they had great experience and they had director's experience, but on that superficial level, just like a doctoral, person with a master's person as their boss, RHIT-RHA relationship can be considered the same thing. So problems of management credibility are highly likely in situations in which professional employees see their managers as non-professionals. To understand such credibility problems fully, one must appreciate that many individual professionals do not regard management as a profession in its own right. There are occasional organizational relationships in which a non-managerial professional must report directly to a non-professional. A direct reporting relationship between a non-managerial technical specialist and a general manager is often marked by disputes concerning managerial judgments and may also be marked by strong territorialism on the part of the professional. All right, so moving on to the professional as a supervisor. Over on page 187, the professional who assumes a management position is taking on a second occupation to an extent that amounts to pursuing a second and parallel career. Management positions turn over as other positions do, and vacant management positions are often filled from the rank and file. There are both advantages and disadvantages to having a particular member of a work group step up into the position of group leader, and likewise there are advantages and disadvantages when the new supervisor comes from outside of the organization. Although familiarity with the specific organizational setting may be helpful to the new supervisor, such familiarity is certainly not a requirement. However, there is one firm requirement of the individual who is to assume command of any work group. So in addition to possessing some knowledge of management, the individual must be intimately knowledgeable of the kinds of work done by the group. So dropping down to that next paragraph, the professional who enters management must ever after wear the hats of both the technical specialist and the management generalist. As a professional, the person is trained as a specialist, and as a manager, however, it remains largely up to the individual to recognize the need to become a generalist and to independently seek out sources of education and assistance. Now, dropping down on that same page, 188, to the bottom paragraph on that second column, the dedicated professional often has far more difficulty than the non-professional in balancing the roles of the specialist and manager. The professional has devoted far more time and effort and commitment to becoming a specialist and has probably done so at least partly because of an attraction to or an aptitude for that kind of work. Some may indeed like their work so well that although they do not necessarily refuse promotion to management, they show an inclination to subordinate the influence of management side of the role so that it does not intrude too far into their favored territory. As the enthusiasm of many professionals for their field is important, so is a liking for management essential for success in management. Usually a liking for a given activity is strongly influenced by one's degree of familiarity or level of comfort with the elements of that activity. Quite simply, the more a person knows about a given activity, the more that person is inclined to like that activity. Conversely, one may be more readily inclined to dislike an activity that seems bewildering, strange, or discomforting. All right, so let's move on to unions. All right, so the bottom of 189, we're going to talk about unions and the professional employee. Unionized workers are declining as a percentage of the country's workforce. Total union membership in all American industries combined has shown a steady decline to the point where the level of union membership at the present is the lowest since the passage of the National Labor Relations Act in 1935. This does not, however, mean that unions are simply going away and that management should regard them as less of a threat than they once were. Nothing could be further from the truth. Although total union membership may be declining nationally, in the healthcare industry today, unions are more of a presence than ever before. In the face of declining membership, unions are struggling to maintain their relevance, and they are actively looking for potential members in areas that have traditionally been non-union or that have been only partly organized. one can see union organizing efforts in industries thought of as essentially non-union, such as banking, insurance, retailing, and healthcare. Unions are concentrating heavily on healthcare and in high-tech areas, and it is no stretch of the imagination to recognize that many healthcare professionals fall into both categories, healthcare and high-tech. So going over onto 190, the recent years' activity in healthcare has shown that workers are inclined to be bolder in labor activities when their skills are in short supply. In many parts of the country, this has certainly been the case with nurses. Given the declining enrollments in nursing schools and the dropout rate for the profession, the available supply of nurses in many areas has not kept pace with the expanding demand. Those working nurses who are needed and know they are needed can hardly be blamed for attempting to improve the conditions of their employment. Nurses, however, are not the only group to interest the labor organizers. Rules issued by the National Labor Relations Board and eventually upheld by the Supreme Court of the United States officially designated 8 bargaining units as appropriate in acute care hospitals. And these 8 are your nurses, physicians, all other professionals, technical employees, skilled maintenance employees, business office clerical employees, security officers, and all other non-professional employees. I think they pretty much covered everybody. So the National Labor Relations Act prevents the NLRB from placing professionals and non-professionals in the same unit unless the majority of the professionals vote in favor of such inclusion. A relative few can request professional exemption from a unit that includes both professional and non-professional employees. If not among the select few eligible for exemption, some professional workers may be counted as included in a given bargaining unit whether or not they wish to be included. Nurses make up the largest group of healthcare professionals, and to date they continue to be the most militant as far as organizing is concerned. If the other professional units' boundary issue should eventually go solidly in the direction of fewer bargaining units, nearly all of the professionals in any given healthcare organization could find themselves swept along with the nurses. Alright, so as always, be sure to read the entire chapter. Again, I covered the highlights, covered the 16 slides on this PowerPoint. So happy studying.